Hey, 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 we're back for another episode of Tea with Tamela. And today I have one of my good friends. Actually, I've known her since I, I was knee high to a duck. I guess that's like the old folks term. But I have Sharita here. And we're just going to chop it up a little bit about mental health, emotional health, all the things that we have going on in our minds that don't always serve us well, and how we can begin to address those things and incorporate different tools and resources, so that it's a healthier way to go about day-to-day life. I started, I guess, a few years ago, probably about 2 years ago, really diving into my self-care and realized that mental health was one of the things that I kind of disregarded. And I started to think back to even when I was like probably a junior in high school, and I was trying to figure out like what I wanted to major in. And I was always kind of concerned or had interest in like thought processes and patterns and how people made decisions. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll major in something that's around like the mental health space or something like that. And I remember somebody saying, like, that's not a real major. It was a family member. And they was like, that's not a real major. Like, what are you going to do with it? I'm like, I don't know. I just want to study, all these things. And needless to say, I was kind of discouraged from there, to really dig deeper into this space. But then I remember probably about 2008, I was doing a summer internship at a library, and a lady brought back a huge stack of books, and they were all on mental health disorders. And so I read those books like page after page after page. And I started to dive in, and like I was so excited about it. I started to share it with my parents and my family. And I feel like in the African American community, like mental health is something that we just kind of disregard. And it's like, oh, give it to Jesus. Oh, everything's okay. And they look at it as something. I guess if you have an issue or you have something that you want to talk to somebody about, or you have these reoccurring thoughts, if it's nothing that is extreme, then there's no need. Or, if you start to talk about your mental health, that means something is so extreme that you're going to be in a padded room next week on all these meds. And so it's just not strongly encouraged. And so I remember, I guess a couple of years ago when I finally said, you know what? I'm doing this. I'm digging in and I'm going for it. I'm getting a therapist. I'm getting a spiritual mentor. I'm getting a life coach. I'm getting all the things. And I remember my mom saying, "What are you telling those people?" And I was like, "The truth. I'm telling them all the things that has uh, been going on in my mind, in my emotions, in just how I make decisions and all of that." And she just really looked at me and was like, "What are you saying? Like that's not like, a thing." And when I started to really, I think, break it down to her, there was a softness, and she started, I think, to really listen and see different patterns, to hear what it was that I was trying to explain. Because my oldest early on was diagnosed with anxiety, and I realized like it was easy for me to identify it in her, but it was hard for me to identify it in myself. And so I'm like, I'm going to take you to therapy, but I don't even go to therapy. I'm trying to figure out all these things with you. But that really encouraged me to make the necessary steps to say, not only do I want what's best for you and your mental health, but I need to have it for myself, because helping me is going to be able to help you. And so I wanted to just bring you in and just really, really dig in, because, we're seeing a lot in the media where our generation is starting to really be, I guess we're breaking loose. Like we're not going to be silenced anymore. And mental health is something that you're hearing over and over again in the professional athlete space, in the professional work spaces. And people are really trying to, I think, gain more wisdom and insight around mental health. But then I also feel like sometimes the term is used like a little loosely, where now that it's a thing, just like social media is a thing, or, juicing and smoothies are a thing. Like, it's a thing now. So what is mental health? I feel like with it being thrown around, like we want to give people clarity on just what is mental health, and why are people starting to open up about it?
Yes, yes. So basically, our mental health is our psychological, emotional, and social well being. And how I break that down is it's basically the condition of our minds.
Mm-hmm.
Our physical health is the condition of our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an obvious thing you can see, you can feel if something is going wrong. And
Yes.
like you said, if you go to your mom and say, my stomach is hurting, it's been hurting for 2 days, or I have a
Mm-hmm.
headache and it's been a week, they're gonna immediately say, go to the hospital, go to the emergency room, because you may have stomach cancer or some kind of digestive issues, or you may
Right.
have like some kind of neurological or something wrong with your brain. But with mental health, because it's the condition of our psychological, our social, which is our relationships, psychological, our mind, and
Mm.
our emotional, our feelings, what we already recognize is that we can't see it. So
That
I
part.
couldn't look at Tamela or anybody else and say that there's something wrong with you mentally by looking at you. I would have to have a conversation with you, and I would have to
Mm-hmm.
observe your patterns and behaviors. And I think that was very important when you opened up from the beginning, just talking about noticing patterns and behaviors, because that's usually what we use to determine what may be going on with you mentally.
Mm. No, that's big. And I think, like you kind of said, we tend to go to the doctor for certain things because we want to save our lives, so to speak. But
Mm-hmm.
then, like, this is discouraged, but we need to be able to save our minds too, because
Yes.
if we're not doing the work on our minds, then it affects like so many other parts of us. Because I remember reading something one time where it was talking about like when babies are teething, and it was saying like as adults we couldn't teeth because the pain is so deep, but because our minds are able to like process it, like it's almost unbearable. So I'm like, if I have other things that's going on in my mind and it's not in a safe place, or sometimes when people think your mind's not in a safe place, they automatically think, oh, you're suicidal or you're going to go and harm somebody else. And it's like, that's not always the case. Like that, what are some other things that you just kind of see inside of people where it's not like everybody who comes in, like they're not about to jump off a bridge, or, they're not bipolar. What are some other things you kind of see sometimes?
Well, there are a lot of other symptoms people present that can indicate some type of mental illness or some type of disorder. And like you said, it's not always those behaviors or patterns or things that just kind of jump out at us.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's just like literally your appetite can change. So if
Mm.
you notice that you haven't had an appetite for over 2 weeks, there's something wrong there. And it's not always something physical. Also, when your sleeping patterns change,
Wow.
there's something wrong there. So when you notice even those type of subtle things, those are obvious signs that there may be something wrong with your mental health. When you notice that your mood is unstable, and if you're normally someone who is joyful and positive and optimistic, but you've just barely been able to get out of the house and do your normal day-to-day activities,
Mm.
those are all signs that there's something wrong with you mentally. And those are unfortunately the signs we ignore a lot, which is why mental health and mental illnesses are sometimes concealed for longer periods of time. And so I just
Mm.
encourage people all the time too that when you're with your family and you're around your family members, when you notice changes,
Mhm.
bring attention to those changes. I think in our community, we have a tendency to ignore things and try to like brush it under the rug or
Yep.
minimize it.
Yep.
But I think it's important that even with our spouses, our children, our parents, our siblings, that when we're around them and we notice subtle changes, to address that with them. Because if we had a conversation with them, we find that it's a lot more than what we see on the surface. And we can help them get the help they need if we just have that conversation as opposed to trying to avoid it.
No, no, that's really big. So when, I guess my question is, when did mental health become like important to you? Like what sparked that interest where you're like, okay, like this is really something that I want to dive deep into?
So I have two answers, or two-part answer to that question. So I decided that I wanted to work in mental health, believe it or not, when I was in high school, probably
Wow.
in middle school.
Okay.
And I didn't know at that time exactly which route I wanted to take because, like you said, a lot of people told me, well, if you go the route of psychology, you're going to be in school for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just
Mm-hmm.
going to take so long for you to just build on that. And so I was like, well, I just know that it's important. There's a
Mm-hmm.
significance to it. And I want to be a part of helping people because I realized from growing up in the community that I grew up in, Tamela, I grew up in a very small town. And I knew at an early age, before ever going to college, that a lot of the people around me that lived in my community suffered from mental illness.
Same.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, and what I understood also is that a lot of those people were being exploited.
Yep.
And that never sat well with my spirit. And so at that age, I just being around it and hearing things and hearing talks and just realizing that these people are really being taken advantage of just
Mm-hmm.
strictly based off the condition of their mental health because they're not well mentally. Somebody's taking advantage of them. And I
Right.
want to be a change. Yeah. So I just decided I want to be a change agent in helping people understand that I can have a mental illness or a mental disorder and be functional and be
Mm-hmm.
able to take care of myself, and I don't have to be subject to abuse from other people or exploitation. And so that's when I decided I wanted to work in mental health. Now, the second part of that answer, when I decided to take my mental health more seriously, is when I had my first real job.
Okay.
Um, yes. So I had been working since I started college, like kind of working part time
Mm-hmm.
under a mentor of mine, and so I had gained a lot of experience. But it was a pretty nurturing, sheltered work environment.
Okay.
But once I started my first real job, I mean, I experienced so much like life experiences. And so I actually started to experience what I like to phrase workplace bullying. And
Wow.
because of that, I dealt with depression. And at the time when it first started, I didn't really know that this was depression. I just thought it was just, okay, I'm just frustrated. Maybe I just need to look for another job. But when I realized how much of an effect these conditions were having on me mentally, physically, emotionally, psychologically, I realized, okay, like this is serious and I have to do what I need to do to take care of me
Right.
and whatever that means. And so that's when I took my personal mental health seriously.
That's big because I think sometimes we're so conditioned to ignore those things, to ignore all the warning signs. And it's like, oh, girl, you'll get over it. Oh, do this or do that. And it's like, it's essentially teaching us to disregard our thoughts, our emotions, our psychological health. Like, they're just all the things. And it's setting, I feel like we've been conditioned also, going back a little bit, to have limited boundaries. Like, I remember growing up and not essentially understanding that there's a thing in having healthy boundaries. And I feel like once we, I guess, are able to identify that, then that allows us the freedom to be able to stand up for ourselves or to take those type of things serious. And sometimes it's just we're taught to ignore it at such an early age that it becomes so much a part of who we are, that when we start to identify it and feel different about it and want to address it, then we start to feel like something's wrong with us. Essentially, it's like, oh, like, what's wrong with me? Maybe it's me. um
Mm-hmm.
but it's so disregarded. And again, it's in small communities, it's in larger communities. But I feel like a lot of times, I the more I dig into it, the more I hear people talk in the Black and brown communities, especially, it's a thing that we're not encouraged to invest in. It's a thing that I feel like we're taught, whether it's intentionally or not, that it's not that important. And so, how can people from our small towns or smaller towns, or, you know, even larger communities. I don't even want to just say in smaller communities, but I do think sometimes in smaller communities we're not exposed to it as much. Like, people aren't talking about it. There aren't a ton
Right.
of different places you can go to really be heard. But how can we in those communities begin to identify and address and really seek to begin to do the work around mental health?
I'm gonna be honest. I think that a lot can be done started from the church,
Oh, come on, girl.
and I know
Woo!
And I know that's alarming to hear for a lot of
Mm,
people because for so long there's been this. It's like you can just go to God in
mm-hmm.
prayer. You don't need a therapist and therapy.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm just an advocate that we need Jesus and therapy. We need prayer plus therapy,
That part.
and it's the plus aspect of it,
Mm-hmm.
in the and,
Mm-hmm.
not the or.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that because in our community, especially the Black community, and even in some brown communities, spirituality and religion is so vital and important. And that's what we're definitely taught from an early age that we have to keep intact. I think that that has to be the place to where we start talking more about mental health as well. Because if we're going to talk a lot about spiritual health and the importance of that, we have to address the mental health because they go hand in hand,
Mm-hmm.
and they're just one is just as important as the other. So I think because of the influence that the church has on our communities, I think that if the conversation started in the church, people would feel more comfortable. People will feel like I won't be shamed and I don't have to
Mm-hmm.
feel embarrassed that I have
Right.
these issues, and that there may be some people, because of course the church is supposed to be a place where we can get information and get resources. We can get help with our and assistance with our bills and
Mm-hmm.
referrals for doctors. You can ask somebody in the church who to go to a doctor for this and that and the other. So it should be the hub for everything else. So I
I
think
like
that if
that.
we start the conversation in small groups and other outlets in our churches more, then that's going to be the way to get to the community and help people to feel more comfortable and to help break that stigma. Because that's ultimately what it boils down to.
No, that's big, and I mean, you really hit the nail on the head, as all people say with that, because we are taught to take everything to the throne, go just pray about it, and it's like it's not that I'm not praying about it, like I'm praying about it, but if you come to me and tell me you have cancer, I'm not gonna tell you just go pray about it. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm gonna
Exactly.
send you
Exactly.
to somewhere
To a
to
cancer
get
specialist.
that part. And
Exactly.
so I think, like you said, once we start to align it and identify it as another health issue, just like we have like these physical things that's going on that we're seeking help for, the same thing, it's important for us to do that with our mental health, but the church has to do a better job in so many different areas without I guess a lot of times they make people feel less than, which is essentially
Right.
not what the body is supposed to do. They make people
Right.
feel like you're not clinging to your faith, or you're not trusting and believing in the God that you're proclaiming, because you need the plus and not the or. And, it's like Jesus
Right.
and therapy, Jesus plus therapy,
Right.
and not Jesus or
Right.
therapy. Like, because God has place these tools and these resources out there, but he's equipped and blessed other people with gifts to essentially be able to help us, just like a surgeon. um
Exactly.
and so I think that's important. How, I guess, being that we're kind of still talking around, like, I guess, people in the church, or like, how can we help the church, like, begin to even see differently around this, I guess, um make mental health something that is comfortable to talk about, comfortable to seek help for. And so you were telling us about how a lot of things began in the church. Like that's the headquarters for so many different other things, and that's the place where we can open up and pray about and talk about, like, our physical health and all other things. We need somebody to mow our grass, we need somebody to check our stomachs or whatever. So how can the church do a better job in making mental health something that is not uncomfortable to discuss, something that's not uncomfortable to seek help, and for us to feel comfortable knowing that because we need Jesus plus therapy, doesn't mean that we're disregarding Jesus. Doesn't mean that we don't believe and we're not praying and we're not trusting in him. But it essentially it just means that we're trusting and believing in God, but we're also trusting and believing that he's equipped and prepared and shaped and molded someone who can also labor alongside us as we cling to him in addressing, this issue, because we're not going to tell a person who has cancer, just go pray about it. Somebody who needs a heart transplant, just go pray about it. So there should not be this discomfort or this fear or this doubt that when we come in and we say, like, I'm struggling mentally, I'm struggling emotionally, like, what can I do? Just go pray about it. So how can we encourage the church, or what would you say? Like, how can we pull them alongside to say, like, this needs to be discussed. We need to feel comfortable about this.
I think that the church has to create a space for that. And I think part of that is leaders have to reach out to people like myself and start trying to get more familiar and comfortable with the topic themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think basically when we're not familiar and comfortable with something ourselves and we're not knowledgeable about something, we're going to be less prone to encourage it.
Right.
So because a lot of our leaders are more seasoned and they come from the generation where we didn't talk about mental health as much and we didn't put a lot of emphasis on it,
Right.
I think it's literally a lack of knowledge. And so I think that if they take the time to seek help themselves as far as
Mm-hmm.
finding out what is this everybody's talking about mental health, there's more to it than obviously there's more to it than just the people who are medicated or in facilities. So let's really like find out what this whole big thing about mental health really is.
Mm-hmm.
And that means bringing in a professional to talk about those things. And I think once the leaders are more comfortable and more knowledgeable, then they're going to be more prone to encourage other outlets and creating spaces in the church. But I think it definitely has to start with them being more knowledgeable. And I think there has to be an understanding in that the preacher isn't or can't always be the one who is providing that.
Absolutely.
The preacher can be a counselor, but the preacher is not a therapist.
That part.
And yes. And so I appreciate with my pastor, he says it all the time. Like I can talk to you about what the word says about your marriage or rearing children, but at the end of the day, in a lot of cases, what people are bringing to the pastors, they can't put their hands on it. It's
Mm-hmm.
way out of their scope.
Right.
And so it just has to be that you have to have the mindset to say, this is out of my scope. And just like if you were going to a physician, that physician would send you to a specialist. Because
Mm-hmm.
this is out of my scope, I'm going to send you to somebody. I'm going to refer you to somebody who can help you on this deeper level.
Right.
Because this is therapy. This is not counseling. Like, this is not spiritual counseling that you need. You
Right.
need some real serious therapy. But I think part of being comfortable with doing that has to come with gaining more knowledge about what it is.
No, no, that's big, because I think a lot of times, like, we feel like we can take everything to one individual, and that's not the case. Like, I believe in pastors. I believe that God has equipped them with just the strength, the knowledge, the bandwidth to handle and help people through so many different crises. But at the end of the day, like, they're not specialists in everything. They're a specialist in what they're a specialist in, like helping people
Right.
learn more about Christ, learn how to walk. They're specialists in discipleship. Like, that's their avenue, that's their lane, and they can take that spiritual knowledge and pour it into what we may have going on in all these different areas of life. But it's not a one shoe fits all type thing. Like, Jesus can cover it
Exactly.
all, but we are trusting and believing in him, but we're also seeking for a professional in that specific area. So I think that that's extremely
Right.
big for not only us to be okay with and able to identify, but leaders as well, to, like you said, to really really reach out and invite people like yourself in to host, whether it's a ladies night or men's night, or because children need therapy too, or children, like, around mental health
Exactly.
and what that looks like, so that we're all aware and informed of all the different things that can be going on that needs immediate attention, or attention from not just a parent, not just a spiritual leader, not just a
Right.
teacher, but from someone who has studied this. And a lot of times, correct me if I'm wrong, you can find a mental health therapist or a counselor or who's a believer like yourself, and you can
Exactly. Exactly.
incorporate your faith into how you're shepherding your families.
Exactly. Exactly. And there are now these whole like there are seminars and workshops that are available for people like myself who I believe in God and I believe in the power that God has in my life, but I also believe in the power that therapy has. And so
Hmm.
there are people who have tied in the two.
That's beautiful.
And it makes it easier. The way I look at it is it's a way to make it easier for the church to digest.
Hmm.
Because I think sometimes what happens is people look at it, especially from the church standpoint, is that we're putting too much um, credit. We're giving too much credit to this thing when all you have to do is pray. When that's not the thing. The thing is still going to be there.
Right. That
Like
part.
whether we give credit and put emphasis on it or not, it's not going anywhere. And so it's not about giving it too much credit. It's just about acknowledging that it's here. It's been here. It's time to address it. Stop acting like it's the elephant in the room, and let's
Right.
talk. Let's talk about it. And so I think pastors and leaders, the same way they use their influence
Hmm.
to tell us, who to vote for and things of that nature, they have to use their influence to encourage people to get the type of help they need outside of just the physical health, but also mental health.
No, no, that's big. And that's so important that we all learn how to use our influence to really push people in the right direction and creating
Right.
a safe place. Whatever our niche is,
Right.
wherever we are, where people feel safe enough to come to us with things, like, listen, I can't help you with that. However, let me direct you versus somebody bringing something to us and we're like disregarding it or making them feel like there's something wrong with them. Like, listen, there
Right.
could be something wrong. I'm not judging that, but I'm not equipped to handle that. So let me get you over here with somebody who I know is equipped and ready and available and has all the tools and the resources to really help you through this season of life or whatever it is that you may be going through at the time. I guess my next question is really how can we help people identify when mental health maintenance is needed? Like sometimes, because it's a term that people are hearing some for the first time for a lot of people, especially like our parents' generation, they're like, what is all this? People just out here telling their business. That's what they're essentially thinking. It's like, no, we need help. Help us. And so it's like, how can people begin to identify even the older generation that no, this is a thing and this could be the very thing that's been hindering you in different faith walks, different family walks, with how you communicate, with how you feel about people or things, or it's just a lot. Kind of how you said earlier, like there are so many different red flags that leads to there being some form of mental health disorder that we totally disregard. And so how can people, I guess, identify when there's maintenance that's needed or.
Well, I think the one of the first things that we have to do is, like I said, start paying attention.
Mhm.
But when there's a change, whether it's like I said, in our sleeping patterns, in our appetites, um, even if there's a change in how we function in our day to day life,
Mhm.
like if you're having a harder time or increased horrible, like difficult time going to work every day and functioning at work, if you're getting write-ups or you're getting reprimanded at work for things this is not normally something that would happen, there's obviously something wrong.
Yeah.
You also start to notice that at home you're a little
Mhm.
bit more moody. It's a
Mhm.
lot, there's something just off. You're screaming at your spouse or you're hollering at your kids. There's something off there. Or the house is a mess.
Mhm.
Like you walk into your home and there's complete clutter, things are everywhere, all over the place, and you think that you're functioning in that chaos. Like those are all signs. Like I tell people, these things are not normal. Like, and so those things that we know are not normal, when we start to see that they pop up in our own lives, like I said, whether it's dysfunction in the workplace, dysfunction in our relationships, or dysfunction in our homes, I always say if it's happening in more than one environment, there's highly likable that you have a mental issue going on that you need to address.
Mm.
And I think the issue is people think the extreme. And
Right.
so if I think that this is going to be something that may cause me to get hospitalized, I'm going to try to ignore it versus dealing with it. But
Right.
what we have to understand is we have to leave it to the professionals to decide how extreme it is, because we can't diagnose ourselves.
That part.
We can't fix ourselves. Our family, our mothers can't. We call our mothers for everything, but they cannot fix us if they're not a professional. Even if they are a professional, they can't.
And
We
they
have
may
to
need
seek
some help
people.
themselves.
Exactly. Because the one thing that we don't talk about is a lot of issues we have are directly related to our parents.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of cases, we're genetically predisposed to mental illness. And if your
Yes.
parents haven't acknowledged their issues and addressed them, naturally, when it comes up in you and you're brave enough to address it, now everybody knows we all got an issue. We all got something we need to work on. So
Right.
I think it just starts with when you see those subtle changes going on in your life, in whatever area of your life, whatever environment, not pushing them to the side, pushing them under the rug, but definitely just acknowledging them and saying, okay, something is wrong and I need to seek some help,
No,
some
that's
professional
big.
help.
That's big. And it's really important. How can people identify the mental health disorders that are easily concealed? Because there are some that are like extreme where it's visible.
Right?
Like, oh, like you may have this going on.
Right.
But I could be wrong, but aren't there also some where they're a little bit easier to conceal? So what are those that are easier to conceal, and how can people kind of resonate or be able to identify like this may be that?
So I think the top three diagnosed mental disorders are anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, and PTSD, which is post traumatic stress disorder.
Okay.
And with anxiety disorder, basically, there are going to be sometimes physiological signs, things that show up in you physically that can help you identify that you may be suffering from anxiety, like heart palpitations, like difficulty breathing,
Mhm.
feeling fidgety.
Mhm.
Those are all signs of anxiety disorder, having difficulty focusing.
Mhm.
Those are all things I think for anxiety disorder that it may be there, but unless you're talking to someone about it, I think it can be easily concealed because no one would know but you. Because no one
Gotcha.
knows that your heart is beating a little bit faster than it
Mhm.
normally is, or
Mhm.
no one knows that when you lay down to go to sleep, your breathing is a little off,
Mhm.
or when you first wake up, like where everything, during those times where everything should feel normal. So
Right.
of course you have to tell people, okay, this is going on and I don't know what this is about. But being able to just, I say, make a list. I
Okay.
encourage people, when you see things like that, make a list. When you notice that your thoughts are always centered around either what could happen in the future, or
Mhm.
what can happen in the past, or what happened in the past. Of course, if you're always focused on what's happening in the future or what could happen in the future, what could go wrong, you may have some issues with anxiety. If
Mhm.
you're preoccupied with always saying, well, I'm not going to do that because what if this happens? That's a very huge sign that, okay, that's an area you may have an issue with. And I think we often minimize that. Yeah, we minimize
Mhm.
that.
That part.
And I'm guilty of that myself. And I have to acknowledge how the pandemic has affected that. I think because
Yes.
we're on extra alert, because we're still in the pandemic. I know people like to think we're out.
Mhm.
No, we're still in it. We're on our way out, but we're still in it, and we're gonna be here for a while. But I
Exactly.
think that has brought along a lot of this as well, because we're always, it's like one thing after the other.
Mhm.
But we have to be careful with that. We have to learn how to retrain our brain and our thoughts And when we see all those negative thoughts and all those what if thoughts creeping up, to change our thought processes. And of course, with major depressive disorder, always being preoccupied with the past. So
Mm-hmm.
preoccupied with things that happened to you in the past that you're not living for the future. Like literally, you're always sad.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can't seem like if you're coming home from work, you lay on the couch, you wake up, it's time to go to work again. Like, or you're always sobbing, you're always down. Like you can't seem to, no matter what's going on around you, pull yourself up.
Right.
If you're those are signs that there may be some depression. And
Okay.
along with those other signs, like I said, with appetite. And with the one with appetite, I want to specify changes in appetite doesn't always mean that I don't want to eat. It may mean that I'm eating way more than I usually would. So I'm gaining a lot of excessive weight or losing weight. So it's not just losing weight, it's also gaining weight and like having a more increased appetite over a certain period of time.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay.
And then, of course, yeah. And then, of course, with PTSD, even though I think we use it so loosely that some people think that it's not one that's easily concealed, it is. Because no one's talking a lot about I'm having these night terrors or nightmares and I'm reliving these events that happened to me when I was 7 or 10. I'm reliving this every day and I can't get it out of my mind. But once
Oh, wow.
again, until you address it, acknowledge that it's happening, acknowledge that it's there, and seek a professional to evaluate you, you're
Mm-hmm.
not going to be able to deal with it. So those are just some little signs and things we can look for in the three disorders that are most highly diagnosed, I think.
No, that's big. Those are all really good, and I never really thought about them in that context of how, because those terms are used so loosely, the specifics in how we ourselves can identify them, but we have to have that knowledge. We have to be exposed to the information. And, we can Google things, but, you Google one thing, you're going to die tomorrow. So that's not always,
Exactly.
the right,
Exactly.
the right way to go.
Exactly.
But that just gives me, I guess, more hope that more people will really begin to put tools and resources out there, use their social media platforms for more than, TikTok's own ice water challenge
Yes.
or something, and to really point out these things because those are so subtle. And those are,
Yes.
again, terms that are used extremely light, where if I don't hear that, I could think, oh, I'm just a little nervous about a test, or I'm just, and you can disregard
Mm-hmm.
it yourself. And then it's hard for other
Right.
people to look at you and be able to identify that. So no,
Right.
that's big. What are some different forms of therapy and treatment for people to, I guess, seek? Well, I guess they can't seek that until they meet with someone, but like if someone came into you and you recognize one of the three that you just kind of broke down for us, what are some forms of treatment or therapy that you would suggest? Or is it based on, they're one in its area and a 10 over here? Or how does that typically work?
So basically, when a person comes in and you complete their psycho eval, is what we call it, that's when you basically, or your biopsychosocial assessment. Because basically from that, you're gathering so much information that you're able to determine exactly what's going on with that person, along with them telling you what their symptoms are.
Mm-hmm.
And so once you really start to build that rapport with the client to find out really what's going on with them, diagnose them, then you determine what type of treatment that you use. One of the most commonly used treatments, I think, is probably CBT, which is cognitive behavior therapy.
Okay.
And basically, the premise behind it is that an individual must correct or change incorrect thoughts and increase the knowledge and skills. So basically, it's just about we've been conditioned to think a certain way and process things a certain way, but we have to learn. Like I think I used the word earlier about changing our thoughts and just basically changing the way we think about things because it may not be serving us at all in a positive
Mm.
way. But of course, there's also other type of treatments like exposure therapy, prolonged exposure therapy, EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization therapy, reprocessing therapy. Um, there is dialectical behavior therapy. There are like family therapy, group therapy.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of different options for therapy, but of course, your therapist, based on their level of expertise, what they're trained in, they'll determine what type of therapy you need. And I always tell people that we have a responsibility to provide what we're knowledgeable in,
Mm-hmm.
and if that person, that client, needs something that we're not certified in or we're not knowledgeable in, to refer them out to somebody who you know is.
That
And
that's
so
big.
that's the whole. So the whole thing is first being evaluated. And when
Mm-hmm.
we talk about Googling things, I tell people the same way you Google, trying to Dr. Google yourself and figure out what's wrong with you, Google the professionals in your area and go to them and let them do
Right.
that, do that for you. And so that's the start. Once you seek out the professional help, you get connected and you get evaluated, let them take it from there.
No,
Yeah.
that's fun. That's important though. I love that. I love that. So what outside of Google, what are
Mm-hmm.
other ways people can locate a professional who's able to help them or help them identify something that could or could not be going wrong? I know, there's so many online resources and tools out there. But I know some like take insurance, some don't, some can't see
Mm-hmm.
you if you're not local. If you're, so it's like all these different things that I'm learning. The more I Google, so what are some ways that people can find the therapist that's suitable for them? And just to add to the end of that, can you fire your therapist and find another one? Just hit on that too.
Yes. So I'm going to start with, there's a great resource called Psychology Today, where
Mm-hmm.
you can go in and search people in your area and it'll show what insurances they accept and if they accept private pay and what those fees and what those things look like. So Psychology Today is one. Also, I tell people to start with your insurance company. Most insurance companies now reach out to clinicians like myself and say, do you want to partner with us to be a direct referral source? And so what that means is, if you're already credentialed through them, if people are coming in with that insurance, we already know they have that insurance because they're calling their own insurance company. That insurance company can refer them directly. They can call me and say, we have one of our members who called in and is needing this service that you're credentialed under us to offer. Can you take them on as a client?
Oh wow. Okay.
And there are also other community resources where you can look up people and find people within your community. I will speak for here in the Jackson metro area. There's Hines Behavior Health where people can start. That can be a starting point, especially if they don't have any insurance. But even hospitals have referral lists. Primary care physicians now are doing better about having referral lists for therapists that they have vetted themselves directly. So there's literally no excuse now for any reason why people don't seek therapy, other than the fact that they don't have insurance or they don't have the income. But like I said, even with that, there are resources where people are offering it free. I think Taraji P. Henson's foundation right now is offering free mental health services to men.
Oh wow.
So you just have to, so you just, like I said, the same way you Google your symptoms, you Google what resources are available and how you can benefit from them.
No, that's
Yep.
big. Listen, I started doing therapy and I still got Jesus and I got about 4 therapists, if I'm gonna be honest.
And that and that brings me to the next part of your question. You asked, once you start therapy with someone, can you fire your therapist? Yes. And I would say that as a therapist, you have to be responsible enough to fire yourself sometimes.
Come
And what
on.
that means is, when it has to be that I want the best for my client every time. And what that means is, once I start seeing a client and we're in that building rapport phase, that assessment phase, if I see that there's a disconnect and it just may not be the best working relationship for whatever reason, I have to acknowledge that there's going to be a barrier in treatment. And because of
Mm.
that, and because it's what's most important to me is this, what my client is getting out of it. I have to be able to say, I appreciate you for seeking me out, and I want you to get the best care possible. So I want to know if I can refer you to a different therapist or to a different agency. And we have to be comfortable with that. We have to get out of our minds, out of our egos, and be comfortable enough to say that this isn't working, and I'm not going to do the client a disservice, because it's those
Mm-hmm.
type of things that will continue to keep people from seeking therapy.
Ooh. Be comfortable firing and being fired. I like that. That's not what you
Exactly.
said, but essentially.
That's it. That's pretty much the premise of it, though. So,
No,
yes,
I like that. And it's important because when you desire what's best for your client, then you're putting them in a better space to
right,
receive the proper care for whatever
right,
their condition may be.
right.
Man, this was good. This was so good, so
Yes.
needed. Is there anything else? One last thing that you would like to leave the listeners with, just, in regards to being healthy mentally?
My thing would be, and it's basically the premise of my practice, Mind OK PLLC. My thing would be that treat your mental health in the same regard as you treat your physical health, your financial health, and your spiritual health. Put it
Mm,
on the same level of importance. When it comes to your appointments, save it in your phone the same way you save your hair appointments and your nail appointments and your golf appointments, all those things. Give it the same level of regard as anything else. Like, it's so important. And I think we fail to understand that our brains tell the rest of our body to do everything that it needs to do. And because our mental health has that psychological aspect of it, if we're not taking care of that, everything else is gonna break down. So just
mm.
treat your mental health just as important as you do all your other health.
That is
Make it a
extremely
priority.
big. Make it a priority because it is a priority. And if you lose
Right.
your mind, you might as well lose
You
everything else.
lose everything. Yes.
So,
And
so
another
no,
thing
that's
I would like
big.
to say, yeah. And the other thing I would like to say is, don't wait until your mental health makes you address it. Don't get to the point to where you don't have any control. Why, when
Mm-hmm.
you start to see something is wrong, address it head on. Because if you don't make time for it, it will make you make time for it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a fact.
Mm. Now that'll preach. That's a whole little sermon series, girl.
Yes, that's
No,
another
that's
episode.
big. That is a whole nother episode. That's true. That is so true. Man, thank you for joining me on this. And I just again want to encourage everybody to really listen to this, take notes, and address whatever it is that you could be having going on mentally. And sometimes it's something that is extremely subtle where you don't even feel like you have an issue. But I think it is important to just see a therapist, see a counselor
Yes.
for ongoing maintenance, even when something's not present. Because, like she said, like you don't want to wait until something is present to run over there. But if you put this into just how you go and do an annual checkup or a physical, or you go see your eye doctor every so many months, I would strongly encourage you to consider seeing a therapist or a mental health coach or whatever it is, somebody to talk to about what's going on up there. And I think if we incorporate mental health inside of our overall health, and we start to really invest into it, like we're investing into everything else, then we'll see ourselves becoming bigger and better people mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually because we're not just a one part being, like they all work together. Um, so yeah, can you tell people where to find you, Sharita?
Yes, I can be found on Facebook and Instagram as Sharita Kincaid. Well, I'm sorry, Sharita Kincaid Stover, LCSW,
Mm,
and and my business page is Mine OK PLLC for
awesome,
both
awesome,
Facebook and
awesome.
Instagram.
Yes, so y'all go look her up. She has some great tools out there. I love like the journal. options that you put out a lot. So that's exciting. I'm like, I never thought about journaling about that. So I'm an advocate for writing things down too. But y'all go check her
Right.
out. Go Google some people. Listen to this. Take some notes, and just take your mental health serious. Thank you for joining me for another episode with Tea with Tamela. See you next week.